If you live in the Bay Area, you probably know about the Computer History Museum, and if you haven't actually visited it, you should. And anyone who visits the Bay Area, I highly recommend it to be on your trip itinerary. Anyone who, shows up here in Sunnyvale and asks, what can I do for an afternoon? This is the place to go to. It's right off the Google campus, and it's probably a half a day's worth of reminiscing about your first personal computer, whether that was a PET or a Apple II or a Commodore or a Trash 80. But there's also, all the IBM PC compatibles, the Osbornes, et cetera, et cetera. If you're into the what you the first mainframe you encountered, it's probably here. The mainframe that at work or at your place at your school, all these mainframes. And then if you're in the history of computers, you might be interested into, the one that you always lusted after, the Cray computer or the Google search engine. They're all here. And if you go further back, the one-of-a-kind computers like the Air Defense Command or various other one-time computers that IBM and others made for the US government or the British government. And then there's the interactive displays. For example, the PDP-1 lab, where you walk in and during the demonstration, you can hear and feel that power supply whop, turning on, and instantaneously the video display is doing its Space Wars thing, instantaneous because of core memory, right? The program's already running. Or you walk into the IBM lab and there's the smell of the machine oil and the wire installation and the rosin, or the feel of the air conditioning that's just a tad too cool. The floor clanking underneath you because it's a raised floor. The whir of the printers, it's a totally immersive experience. Now, my favorite is actually this machine right here, this monster machine, which when is running is kind of like something out of a steampunk anime or book. So let's have one of the docents actually talk about this little creature.
My name is Alan. I'm a volunteer docent here at the Computer History Museum, and I'm going to tell you the story of the man, Charles Babbage, his machine designs, and how this amazing machine behind me happened to get built and come to our museum. Julie, standing down here by her crank, is the power supply of this machine, and it takes a lot of skill. She's very skilled at managing the various load on this crank, and she has to crank very steadily because there's a lot of stuff going on. And you'll be fascinated, I think, with the story of Babbage and his times, because you probably all know what it is to come to sort of develop something a little ahead of its time. So this is a story very, very familiar to some of us. So before I even begin talking about it, it's good to study it as a moving sculpture. So let's let Julie crank it through about 5 cycles here, and you guys can look at it. If you have we'll only have about 45 seconds, but you should kind of rotate around and go look at the back happening and come back here in front of me in a few seconds, and we'll talk about it. So let's just make it move. I'll get out of the way. All righty, come on back around to the front. We'll talk a little bit here. Now, in that little brief time, Julie was solving an equation, what we call a fifth-order polynomial. She did it 5 times in that amount of time while we were watching the machine. And this machine is based on a mathematical principle called finite differences. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But first, let me back up to talk about the inventor. Charles Babbage was born in England in 1791, son of a London banker. He was sent to university, very well educated in mathematics and science. And if you look at the beginning of the 19th century, scientists were multidisciplined. That is, today we have this amazing specialization. But back then, scientists dabbled and mathematicians dabbled in a lot of different areas. And Babbage was one of those who we might call today a sort of Da Vinci man. He had lots of great ideas, and some of them got executed. And for example, he invented the ophthalmoscope that physicians look into your eyes with. That was complicated, but he also invented a simple thing called the cow catcher that goes on the front of locomotives. He also invented a semaphore signal to communicate between ships at sea and lighthouses. Very, very clever guy. On the other hand, like some residents of this valley, and I know, he wasn't great at communicating with other carbon-based life forms. He had a really kind of curmudgeon-y personality that got him in trouble, especially if you disagreed with him. And it wasn't only in science and mathematics that happened. To give you an idea, an insight into his personality, I just want to read to you a letter he wrote to one of his contemporaries, the poet Tennyson, criticizing one of his poems and asking him to please change it. The letter reads, "Sir, in your otherwise beautiful poem, The Vision of Sin, there's a verse which reads, 'Every moment dies a man, every moment one is born.' It must be manifest that if this were true, the population of the world would be at a standstill. I would suggest," this is chutzpah, "I would suggest that the next edition of your poem you have it read, quote, 'Every moment dies a man, every moment, 1 1/16 is born.'" So that gives you a little clue into this sort of geeky personality here. Okay. The story of the machines really begins in the early 1820s when Babbage and a colleague have a project to review various publications of books of mathematical tables. Now, you all look almost old enough to remember the days when we had to use a slide rule in these books to solve some of our problems, to look up natural logarithms or common logarithms, tables of integrals, trigonometric functions, and of course, Britain was the king of the seas, the world's superpower at the time, using astronomical tables to navigate on the ocean. Well, when he and his colleague looked at various publications of these books, what do you think they found? Yeah, one book was different than the next. Where is the error? That's the question. Babbage immediately said, we got to think of a way to recalculate these tables infallibly. After all, this is the Industrial Revolution. We're inventing railroads and factories, machinery of production. Surely we can figure out a way to do this. And he drew up a machine which today we call difference engine number 1. It relied on this principle of finite differences to solve up to 7th order polynomial equations. And he then, once he had it drawn up, he needed the next thing an entrepreneur needs to bring his device to reality, which is money. There were no venture capitalists in England in the 1830s, so he went to the funder of last resort that everybody loves to get money from, the government, the crown. And they indeed said, okay, we will fund it. A very, very loosey-goosey contract, by the way. And Charles Babbage then needed the next ingredient, which was a very skilled machinist, toolmaker. Because you have to remember, in those days, there were very few standards. How do you make gears reliably? There were no standards for screw threads, all that stuff. So he found a very good toolmaker, who was, because he was a very good toolmaker, he was also a bit of a prima donna. So you can imagine these two guys communicating. First difference engine. The only thing that he ever built was a small demonstrator model, which is reproduced in a case over there if you get a chance to look at it. So he could demonstrate it at parties and when he was out trying to raise money for the project. So he moved on, though. He kept inventing things, and he went to work on a much, much more ambitious project. You think he would scale down. He scaled up. He drew up the analytical engine, which was a full-scale computer, mechanical computer, that could add, subtract, multiply, divide, branch, be programmed with punch cards. Yes, 1830s. It was an amazing machine. It would have been bigger than a locomotive, so I don't know how he ever thought anybody would build it, but it was a good mental exercise. Probably one of the largest mechanical devices ever envisioned by man. Next, while he was doing that, he thought he had a better idea for building the difference engine with fewer parts. And he designs difference engine number 2 in great detail. It has only a mere 8,000 parts. And he offers it to the British government, and they politely refuse. They say, we've moved on, Charlie. We already gave you enough money to build 20 locomotives, and you didn't produce anything. So that's the end of it. Charles Babbage, during his life, never built any of these machines. He said, another age, you'll have to judge whether any of them would have worked. Fast forward, 1985. 130 years later, roughly, the curator of the London Science Museum, Doran Swade, has Charles Babbage's drawings for difference engine number 2, and he says, I wonder if it will work. Let's try to build it. And they embark on a similar odyssey, money, time, machine shops, so that in 1991, Babbage's 200th birthday, they have the calculating set of the part of the machine built, from where Julie's standing through here, where you see 8 registers, 31-digit number registers, vertical registers of numbers, so that you could have 7 difference columns plus the result column. But the most important part of the machine, Babbage felt, was this part down here, which is the printer stereotyper. You see, anybody can do the math with finite differences and solve the equations, but how does one make sure that after that you don't make a mistake? Because if you write down the answer, people sometimes reverse digits. Then you give it to a printer who's using movable type, right? Very easy to mess that up. So he wanted to make sure that that didn't happen. This device takes the result from this register, transfers it to this printer here. You'll see the type wheels rotate. A little inker comes up, puts ink on the type. The paper is brought up to the printer and prints the answer. You won't see that actually print because we don't like to mess this thing up with the ink. It works like a printing press. Then, most importantly, this tray down here would be filled with a plastic material like plaster of Paris. Right after the print cycle, another set of type rotates down, impresses the answer into the plaster. The tray is indexed in, waiting for the next answer, etc., till the page is full, the mold is full. A printer takes it, pours lead in there, has a printing plate, no movable type. So he did everything he possibly could to avoid error. And believe me, unless this machine is broken or jammed up, it cannot produce a wrong answer. So, now, as I said, by 1991, the museum had built this calculating section. How were they going to finish it? Their plight is seen by an American entrepreneur named Nathan Myhrvold. He was once the CTO of Microsoft. He's running a very interesting company up in Seattle now. I noticed they're just inventing a laser beam weapon that zaps mosquitoes that carry malaria. I'm not making that up, by the way.
It works. I've seen it.
You've seen it work? Okay, great. So anyway, he says, I'll tell you what, London Science Museum, I'll fund you to finish this first serial number 1, but then I want you to build me a whole difference engine for my private collection. And this machine, you see, is Nathan Myhrvold's difference engine number 2, completed in March of 2008. And he's letting us keep it here to show it to you folks for a while, I hope, a long while, I hope. And afterwards, we're going to take it up and stick it in his living room. So, right next to the T-Rex skeleton, he's already got it. So, okay. So let's now look again. Let's crank it. I want you to watch as the addition takes place. We've got this equation set up. So in fact, we're using 5 of the 7 difference columns. And you will see the addition taking place by these big sector gears in between, adding the numbers from one column by rotating them back towards 0 value, transferring their value to the next column, and then resetting the column to its original value as it comes down. And for that reason, these columns jump up and down. Go ahead, Julie. You will also notice this clanking sound. That is the sound of these big interlock blades. You see that run completely up and down the column, snapping in, because when you don't want those columns to rotate, you don't want them to drift in between 2 numbers. So that lock comes in, locks up the column, resets all the gears neatly, so you have integer digits on every column. And then you will see the print cycle happen. The type is going to rotate in a second. There's the rotation, print, stereotype, the tray index is in. Watch the next one come up here. There's the rotation, the type, ink, print, stereotype. Now, when this tray gets to the end of the column, it's automatically programmed because it will come zipping out, rotate across, ready for the next column. Not only that, there are 2 of these trays in here. Babbage wanted 2 different sizes for the books, or 2 fonts. One this size and one big. In addition, what happens when this tray is full? Julie's way down here. You don't want to overflow this thing, right? So there's a little weight dropping down here, which is pulling on this piece of catgut, which comes up here, across the machine, to a little pawl. When that tray fills up, it's going to shut off the machine by disconnecting the crank, the crank. That means you've got to come down here and change this tray. We thought of all these things. Okay, now we're going to go around the back, and Julie's going to crank it some more, and we can look at one of the more mesmerizing parts of this machine. So let's go around back. So what the heck is going on here? This is not a DNA model. He would have really been ahead of his time if he thought of that. The biggest problem in designing calculators in the 1800s was, how do you carry? When you're adding, you go past 9 on a column starting on the right, you've got to carry the 1. Those mechanisms were, believe it or not, a little difficult to design because you have to carry all the way across. I remember my odometer sticking in my car when it got to 99,999. There seemed to be not enough energy to push them all over the top. What happens in this machine is, he was very clever about managing the energy. When one of the bottom wheels, or less significant wheels, goes from 9 back to 0, a tab on the wheel energizes a little mechanism here, and it protrudes out. Then, at the right part of the cycle, that'll happen up and down the column. At the right part of the cycle, we start from the bottom with these hooks. They come around. If that thing is worn, saying, I need to be carried, the hook engages the mechanism, another mechanism, and pushes the wheel just above it by 1 digit. If that happens to go through 9 at the time, that'll be activated, and the next one will be, and right up the column. So if you're a computer person, we're polling the register for carries, right? And that's exactly what happens. In fact, you could call the carry warning sort of a primitive flip-flop, because we activate it until it's reset, it stays there. So we got all these. In addition, to keep on with the computer parlance, he figured out that it would take too much energy to add all these columns at one time. So he pipelined the machine so that odds are added to evens in one part of the cycle and evens to odds in another part of the cycle. Even so, the energy Julie puts out varies considerably over the cycle. So it takes some talent to keep up that pace, which is very steady cranking. Otherwise, things jam up on us. Okay, one more thing. You can all turn around and see this board. I think you've all got a little algebra, so it won't lose you here. How does finite differences work? Just a quick illustration of how finite differences work in solving equations. Here is a simplest I could think of. Result equals x squared plus 1. In order to program that machine, what we have to do is solve these polynomial equations manually n plus 1 times, one more than this exponent. So in this case, 3 times. I've got to do it manually. So we can do that together. If x equals 0, the result is 1. X equals 1, the result 1 squared plus 1 is 2. 2 squared is 4, plus 1 is 5, right? Now, I subtract the first 2 solutions and put the difference in difference column number 1. The next 2, subtract difference column number 1. Then subtract the first 2 differences, put it in difference column number 2. Notice for a second order equation, I wind up with a constant in difference column 2. For a third order equation, I would wind up with a constant in 3. For a fifth order equation, I would wind up with a constant in difference column 5. I then take these numbers with some adjustment because of this polling, and we manually boot them into the machine. There's a process for us manually turning the wheels, setting them to those initial differences. From now on, we only have to add to solve for every sequential value of the unknown x. Want the answer? 2 plus 3 equals 5, 5 plus 5 equals 10. X equals 4, 2 plus 5 is 7, 7 and 10, 17. It'll work for any polynomial equation. So, and if you look at the machine now and can read the numbers, you'll see the difference column number 5 remains a constant on the machine. All the other numbers are changing. The museum in London always voted on whether this was game-changing. In other words, is the concept of the machine wrong? Or are we just fixing something that engineer Charles Babbage and his excellent machinist would have said, well, that's obviously wrong, we got to fix that. So that's the way some of these fixes got made. Some of them were fairly large, some of them small. One of the most obvious is Charles Babbage envisioned cranking this from this big top gear, meaning that one revolution of the crank would give us one answer. Unfortunately, Julie hasn't the strength to propel the machine from there, and neither did anybody at the museum, so they put a 4-to-1 reduction gear in here. That's why we have to do 4 revolutions of the crank to get an answer. 4 revolutions of the crank, 8 seconds for 4 revolutions, if anybody wants to calculate millions of floating point operations per second from that. So there are several of those little things in the machine. The other thing I'd like to just mention before we finish is what's the impact of Charles Babbage's machines on computing history? That's why we're in business here in this museum. And there's a lot of dispute about that. Lots of books about Charles Babbage and his influence. My view is, after reading some of them, that it's not huge because, and you can relate to this, I think he was so far ahead of his time with this, and he never built the machine. So people did not build on that technology. Much later in the century, others knew that these machines could be made and kind of took off on it, but that really lessened his influence on history. However, he did have a young female protege by the name of Ada Lovelace. Ada was the daughter of Lord Byron the poet, but her mother didn't want her to be a poet and shoved her into math and science, very unusual. And she really was enamored with Babbage's ideas. Not with Babbage, by the way, but she was very enamored with his project. And she, at one point, wrote a paper commenting on a French paper where she said, gee, I realize that these are only numbers on these machines, but that number could represent a character in the alphabet as well as it can represent a number, or it could represent a symbol. And I've envisioned that we'll be able to program these various devices to manipulate symbols, characters, and words. So there was a little vision there. But otherwise, it took way into the later part of the century for people to start building reasonably priced, smaller calculating machines, of course. So we're going to crank it once more, and then we'll be hanging around here if you guys have any questions. Just so you can take it all in now that you know how it works and see what's happening. My name is Alan. I'm a volunteer.
So digging into the vision of sin, was Charles Babbage just what we would call trolling Baron Tennyson? Or did he really have that kind of personality where precision was essential? And then the other question is, where did he even get these statistics of 1 and 1/16? Actually, the answer there is that his father, the banker, had the estate of an insurance syndicate and was able to get the tables of births and deaths that this insurance syndicate used. And Babbage actually considered going into that industry himself, creating an insurance syndicate. And he never did follow through on that idea, but he had the access to the information. Now, question about trolling. When he is in the disagreements with the Crown in terms of whether the project should continue, there were debates in Parliament that basically poked at Babbage, and maybe the members of Parliament didn't understand Babbage's machines, or maybe Babbage didn't understand that the members of Parliament were poking at one of the fundamental aspects where maybe human computers would understand whether or not the question was even reasonable and not try to, divide by zero or something like that. Another indication that he was maybe not just a misanthrope, but more of just obsessed with precision, or maybe had a different take on life, is something you might kind of empathize with, which is the noise of surrounding people interfering with your intellectual work. But he also tried to actually create laws to prevent organ grinders and create laws to prevent kids from hooping in the streets. Well, if you've ever seen those movies where the kids are hitting a hoop that's going down the street and, they're scaring all the horses, etc. In a kind of a serendipitous find, about a year ago, my wife, who was a volunteer at the Mountain View Library, came across this catalog of the 1991 exhibition at the Science Museum in London. And she brought it home so I could take a look at it because, she knew I was interested in these machines. This catalog cleared up a couple of misconceptions of mine. First off, Babbage was not the first to have these calculating engines, not even the first to have these stepping engines. So upper left-hand corner, we have Blaise Pascal's Pascaline, which is capable of adding numbers. Now, due to the carry problem, it wasn't completely accurate. But Leibniz, one of the fathers of calculus, creates this step drum, which is the centerpiece. And so the step drum was a partial solution to the calculating engine problems. The final one here is the Mueller calculator, which pretty much solved the carry problem, but maybe not. But Mueller, what's important about Mueller is he was the first one to actually consider and talk about adding a printer to the end of the calculator. So even the printer is not an original idea with Babbage. And Babbage never finished this engine, but contemporaries did. So Schütz, father and son team in Sweden, created at least 3 engines. Engine number 3, they actually sold. This life assurance tables in the lower left-hand corner was printed by a Schütz machine. Now, Babbage could have done that, but he did not. On the right-hand side, you see one of the stereotype plates from the Schütz machine. Weberg, another Swedish company, created this smaller engine as well. And I should mention that both Weberg and Schütz, although influenced by his ideas, and they actually probably saw his plans, did not use Babbage's plans. So the Weberg machine here printed logarithmic tables, which were again published. So could have been, but a miss for Babbage. He's just obsessed with the precision that he wants this calculating engine. On the right-hand side, the difference engine number 1, the partial portion of that, and in addition to the falling out he had with the royal government, he had a falling out with Joseph Clement, his engineer, who wasn't being paid on time. Not a unfamiliar story. So he's still obsessed, and he's reminiscing about this obsession, even while he's shilling his next difference engine and his analytical engine. So why is it that he is actually known for being the father of computing engines? It's a good question. When he's shilling, the government is basically saying, nope, go away. We gave you enough money and you didn't deliver. The answer, as the docent said before, is probably Ada Lovelace and what she said about the analytical engine. So the analytical engine, if you can imagine taking the difference engine, and one of these little circles would be the difference engine. And you have registers, the 16 on the right-hand side is the registers. And these different computing units around the circle. And they're all interconnected with various mechanisms. Can you imagine the power required to just keep cycling these together, and how would they be synchronized and all this kind of stuff? Precision machines, probably not doable at that time and age. So Ada wrote about this analytical engine. And she also wrote about the difference engine number 2, and she wrote about the distinctions between the two. And she talked about how the analytical engine was capable of going both in a forward motion and a backwards motion. And so if you read her description of the machine, you can tell that it's truly a Turing machine. It steps forward, you can reverse, it steps back, almost a textbook definition of a Turing machine. Makes me wonder if Turing even knew about Babbage's analytical engine or not. So anyway, he's still shilling, but even though there were a lot of knock-on effects, the government decides, you know, you don't have a good track record. We're not going to be able to fund you. He, after his life, his son takes over the difference engine parts and starts to try to continue the work. He creates some of the registers for the analytical engine, but eventually all these items were donated to the Science Museum, or a predecessor of the Science Museum. So all good things come to an end. We're going to actually look at the going away part.
Back there now, because this is the last five. The last five right now. By the way, if you've been noticing, we've been showing the answers as we've been going over the stuff.
डिपेंडिंग ऑन क्या सरफेस है ऊपर नीचे कर रहा है
Okay. 3650.
Good.
All right. That's it for the cranking. Anyone in the back should come out to the front because we're going to finish up the story. Well, 110 years have gone by. It's 1985, the year after the Macintosh came out. And a guy named Doran Swade becomes the curator of the London Science Museum, and he asks his staff, is there anything we've got that we've never exhibited? They don't exhibit plans, they said. They're down in the basement. Well, one of the guys from his crew had been down in the basement looking over the plans, and he found Babbage's plans for difference engine number 2. And he told Doran Swade to go down and look at them because he thought there was something very interesting about them. Well, Doran figured it out for himself. Those plans were complete enough that it was probably something that Babbage could have built and that it would have actually worked. But how did they find out? Well, they got the beautiful fragments, and they find out it's made out of cast iron, mild steel, and bronze, very common material. And Clement was achieving 1.5 thousandths of an inch tolerance when he was carving the number ones. So they go to the companies that make these things, ask them if they can carve them at that tolerance, and they said, are you kidding? We can make them fit like a glove. No, we don't want that. We want 1.5 thousandths of an inch, because that's all Babbage could achieve. So they dumbed down their machines and produced sloppy parts. They used difference engine number 2's design to build another version of the beautiful fragment. And it worked perfectly. So now the museum went through the process of getting the funding to actually build the machine, and they started working on it right away. And by, I guess, early 1991, they were almost done with the engine, building the engine, and someone pointed out that December 26th was the 200th anniversary of Charles Babbage's birth. So they hurried up and got it finished by Christmas. On the next day, on his birthday, they presented it to the London public, and they went crazy because the machine was actually working. You could read the numbers off the number was just like I've been doing. Except they ran out of money, and they couldn't build a printer. So they just kept presenting it that way for several years until through the doors comes Bill Gates. And Doran thinks to himself, Gates, money, printer, walks up to Bill. Would you be willing to fund our typesetter for the Babbage difference engine? He says, no, but I know somebody who might be. And he gives them the name of his retired chief technical officer, Nathan Mearborn. So they called Nathan on the phone. Your former boss suggested you might be willing to fund the typesetter for our Babbage difference engine. Are you interested? He says, yeah, I'm interested in that kind of stuff, but I'd have to see it. So they invited him and his wife to come over to London to see it. They're seen walking around the machine whispering to each other, and she says this to him, but they could hear her say this. Not in my house. What she was talking about was the smell of the oil that's used to lubricate the engine. Anyway, Nathan walks up to Doran Swade and says, you want a new printer? Is that what you're after? He says, yeah. I'll build your printer on one condition, that you build a clone of the engine, okay, including another printer for that, and I'll pay for all of it. But by the way, make sure you get rid of that smelly oil, which they did. This is the stuff that's used in vegetable processing plants. It has no odor. So they started on this project right away. By 2003, they had the first printer done, which was theirs. They're almost done with the engine. By the end of 2007, the second printer was ready and the engine was ready. So they called Nathan on the phone. We're ready to put this on a 747 and ship it up to the SeaTac airport. We understand you want to put this in your living room next to your Tyrannosaurus Rex. He says, that's the plan, but how much does it weigh? Well, it weighs 5 tons. My marble force can't support that. I can't take it. You can give it to the, I'll have to do something about that. You can give it to the Computer History Museum for now. I'll give it to them for a 1-year lease, no cost. So it flies into San Francisco in April of 2008. Big convoy comes down, gets put down where the cafe is now in a great big box. You take the sides off the box, inside is a bill of lading. It says contents, one difference in it. All the major screws had shaken loose on the machine, and it had disarrayed itself, and we couldn't crank it. So we called upon all the Queen's men to come over here and put Humpty Dumpty back together, which they did, and they got it up and running by May. And we learned a lot of things about the machine and how to maintain it ourselves, and it's been running ever since. Okay, until today. Today is the last day. Now, that 1-year lease turned out to be a lot longer than 1-year lease, as you can see. But when we called him back at the end of the year and said we were ready to ship it to him, he said he wasn't ready. We asked him if we could keep it until 2012. He said no. We had to call him back every December. Well, by the time we got to the end of 2011, which was until 2012, we called him back and he pushed it to the next year. And it's been going on like that until this last December. We called him and he said, I want my machine. And what he's going to do with it, he's going to put in the lobby of his own company and maybe demonstrate it from there. I don't know. But it's his property, so we can't say no. And that's probably why the parking lot is all messed up. We can't park because we got to bring the crane in here to take it out of here.
This was a demo video put out by Intel and the Computer History Museum. So, lessons learned, at least for me. They're the traditional lessons that Babbage didn't learn, but we probably should take to heart. But the most important one, of course, is that you have to have a beautiful and famous protege.